I have never believed in the soul. To me, the human mind was simply a biological machine, a wet gray architecture of synapses and electricity, prone to malfunction but governed by laws as rigid as gravity. I built my career on this certainty. I raised my daughter Ivy on it. There were no ghosts in our house, only firing neurons. That certainty died the winter Ivy stopped sleeping. It wasn't a gradual decline, it was a sudden, violent cessation of rest. One night she was 10 years old, the next she was a hollow vessel. She ceased to speak, she ceased to eat. She simply sat in her room, staring at the ceiling with eyes that blinked far too slowly, her chest rising and falling in a rhythm that felt less like breathing and more like a mechanical process. The house, a fortress of glass and steel perched on the frozen ridge, became a tomb. The silence was absolute, save for the hum of the HVAC system, which seemed to grow louder as Ivy grew quieter. On the fourth night, I woke to a cold that bit through the duvet. The thermostat was set to 70, but the air in the master bedroom was freezing, a sharp, metallic dampness that tasted of wet limestone and iron. It was the smell of a place that had been sealed underground for centuries. I sat up, my breath pluming in the dark. Ivy was standing at the foot of the bed. She was a silhouette against the moonlight, barefoot and motionless. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring at the blank wall, her head tilted at an unnatural angle. I didn't call out to her. The paternal instinct to comfort her was overridden by a primal, lizard-brain revulsion. I got out of bed and approached her. Her skin was cold enough to burn. When I took her wrist to check her pulse, the flesh felt dense, heavy, as if the bone beneath had turned to lead. She didn't react to my touch. She didn't flinch when I shone the bedside lamp into her eyes. Her pupils were blown wide, swallowing the iris, black holes absorbing the light. She didn't speak, she didn't acknowledge me. She simply opened her mouth and emitted a sound, not a word, but a perfect, high-fidelity reproduction of the house settling. A wooden creak, followed by the hiss of the wind, coming from a human throat. I led her to my study. I needed to see the mechanism of this failure. I needed the comfort of data. I sat her in the leather chair and attached the portable EEG leads to her scalp. She sat paralyzed, her gaze fixed on the empty air, her breathing slow, irregular. I powered on the machine. The monitor flickered to life. The line was flat. I stared at it, the logic of my profession crumbling. A flatline meant brain death. It meant the girl sitting 3 feet away, upright and blinking, was a corpse. There was no electrical activity, no delta waves, no beta waves, nothing. Then the needle jumped. It wasn't a brain wave, it was a spike, vertical, violent, synthetic, then silence, then another spike. I watched the pattern emerge, counting the seconds between the surges. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Pause. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It was the same 7-syllable pattern I had read about in obscure texts on auditory hysteria, but this wasn't hysteria. It was a broadcast. I turned up the audio monitor. The room filled not with static, but with a sound that made my teeth ache, a low hum, more like a vibration that pulsed behind my eyes. Thumpa, thumpa, thumpa. The rhythm on the screen synced perfectly with the lights overhead, which began to buzz and dim in time with the spikes. The air in the study grew heavier, damp. I reached out to terminate the session, my hand hovering over the power switch. Before I could flip it, Ivy's hand shot out and clamped onto my wrist. Her grip was crushing, mechanical. She leaned forward, the smell of ozone and wet earth overwhelming my senses. She didn't speak with her own voice, she didn't speak with mine. A sound vibrated from her chest, bypassing her vocal cords entirely to resonate directly in my skull. Do not answer out loud. The EEG machine screamed, the needle tearing through the paper, carving a solid black line of noise. Ivy closed her eyes, and the house plunged into darkness. The darkness in the house was heavy, a physical weight that pressed against my eardrums like deep water. When the power died, the humming of the refrigerator and the low buzz of the electric lights vanished instantly. In that sudden, crushing silence, the only sound left was the wet, ragged breathing of the thing that looked like my daughter. I didn't move, I couldn't, my wrist still throbbed where she had gripped it, the skin feeling frostbitten, burned by a cold that had no biological source. Then came the movement. There was no sound of footsteps, no pad of bare feet on wood, just a soft, wet slap followed by a drag, slap, drag. The cadence was wrong, uneven, heavy, like a marionette with cut strings being pulled across the floor. She was moving away from me, retreating into the black throat of the hallway. I fumbled for the drawer of my desk, my fingers shaking as I located the emergency flashlight. I clicked it on. The beam cut through the dust motes, a pale lance in the gloom. The leather chair was empty. The EEG leads lay on the floor, still attached to the machine, torn from her scalp. There was no blood, just a few strands of hair caught in the adhesive. I walked into the hallway. The beam of the flashlight swung wildly, illuminating flashes of the familiar, a family photo, a coat rack, the closed door of the bathroom. But the house felt alien. The architecture seemed to stretch, the shadows lengthening into impossible geometries. Then I heard it. It came from the living room, a sound. Thump, click, whir. It was the sound of the furnace kicking on, a mechanical, rhythmic chugging that I had heard every winter night for 10 years. But the furnace was dead, the power was out. I moved toward the sound, my socks sliding on the cold floor. The noise repeated, perfect in its fidelity, indistinguishable from the machine itself. Thump, click, whir. I rounded the corner and shone the light toward the sofa. Ivy was standing in the center of the room. Her back was to me. Her spine was twisted at an angle that made my stomach turn. Her right shoulder dropped too low. Her head listed to the left as if her neck could no longer support the weight of her skull. She wasn't generating the sound from a machine. It was coming from her throat. Her mouth was open, her jaw slack, and from within her vocal cords came the mechanical, grinding percussion of the house's heating system. She wasn't just making a noise, she was playing it back. She was a biological tape recorder, looping the ambient sounds of her environment to fill the silence she despised. The mechanical whirring cut off the moment the light hit her. She didn't turn around, instead her body gave a violent jerk. A loud pop echoed through the room, the sound of a joint dislocating. Then another. Her shoulder blade shifted under her thin nightgown, sliding upward like a plate of shifting tectonic rock. She was realigning. The thing inside her was trying to fit into a shape it didn't understand, stretching the skin to accommodate a geometry that wasn't human. She began to turn, not by stepping but by swiveling at the waist, her vertebrae grinding audibly. When the flashlight beam hit her face, I nearly dropped the light. She was smiling, but the smile was too wide, stretching the corners of her mouth until the skin turned white. Her eyes were still blown black, void of any recognition. Then she spoke. Elias. My heart stopped. It wasn't my voice this time. It wasn't hers. It was Sarah's. My wife had been dead for 3 years. I knew the cadence of her voice better than my own, the soft lilt on the vowels, the breathy hesitation. The thing in my daughter's body reproduced it perfectly, capturing the exact tone of terrified intimacy. It hurts, Elias, the thing whispered, the smile never wavering. The car, it's crushing me, please pull me out. I stumbled back, hitting the wall. These were words Sarah had spoken only once, in the twisted metal of a wreck on a highway 3 years ago. Words I had never repeated. Words that existed only in the privacy of my own trauma. It keeps what it hears, the voice whispered, shifting suddenly from Sarah's panic to a low, guttural static. I realized then that this wasn't possession, it was theft. The frequency, the resonance was excavating us. It was digging through the electrical impulses of my daughter's brain, finding the memories of her mother, the sounds of our home, and using them to hollow us out. I turned and ran for the kitchen, grabbing the wall phone. The landline, it was old copper wire, it should work even without power. I needed help. I needed an ambulance, the police, anyone who could stop the sound. I lifted the receiver to my ear. There was no dial tone. There was only the rhythm. 7 beats, a pause, 7 beats. And then from the living room behind me, Ivy began to scream. But it wasn't a scream of pain, it was the dial tone, a high, perfect electronic drone pouring out of a human throat, loud enough to shatter glass. The scream didn't stop, it climbed, a rising sine wave of pure electronic agony that shattered the kitchen window, raining shards onto the linoleum. The noise wasn't coming from her lungs, it was being pushed through them. I clamped my hands over my ears, huddling on the floor, and in that deafening pressure, the logic finally snapped into place. She wasn't possessed, she was amplified. The entity was a parasitic resonance feeding on the sensory input of the house, using her nervous system as a biological antenna. To kill it, I didn't need a priest, I needed a vacuum. I scrambled to my feet, the sound vibrating in my teeth. I grabbed Ivy. She was rigid, her muscles locked in a titanic contraction, vibrating like a tuning fork. I hoisted her over my shoulder. She felt impossibly heavy, dense as wet sand, and ran for the master bedroom. It was the most insulated room in the house, triple-paned glass, heavy blackout curtains, sound-dampened walls for my own insomnia. I threw her onto the bed. She didn't react. She lay there, her mouth still open, emitting that high-pitched dial tone. I went to work. I tore the sheets into strips. I grabbed the medical restraints I kept in my travel kit and strapped her wrists and ankles to the bedposts. She didn't fight. She just watched me with those blown-out black pupils. Then I raided the closet, pulling down every heavy blanket and duvet, nailing them over the windows. I shoved towels into the gap beneath the door and sealed the vents with duct tape. I was building a tomb, an anechoic chamber. The room grew stiflingly hot, the air thick and recycled. I grabbed the white noise machine from my nightstand. It was a high-end medical device capable of generating conflicting frequencies. I set it to the harshest setting, Brownian noise, deep, rumbling static, a chaotic wall of sound designed to scramble auditory processing. I placed the speaker directly against her chest, right over her heart. I turned the volume to maximum. The effect was instantaneous. Ivy's back arched off the mattress. Her mouth snapped shut, cutting off the dial tone. For a second there was silence. Then the screaming started, but it wasn't a human scream. It was the sound of a radio being crushed, a distorted, garbled screeching that tore out of her throat as the white noise collided with the parasitic frequency. The machine on her chest roared like a jet engine. Ivy began to vibrate. It wasn't a seizure, it was a blur. Her outline became indistinct, fuzzy, as if she were shaking apart at the molecular level. The bed frame rattled against the floorboards, matching the rhythm. 7 beats, a pause, 7 beats. The entity was fighting back, trying to find a rhythm in the chaos. The room began to shake. The pictures on the walls rattled, and the perfume bottles on the vanity danced and shattered. The pressure in my ears popped, painful and sudden, as the air pressure dropped. Ivy lifted. She didn't float, she was pushed. The vibrations were so intense they were repelling gravity. She hovered 3 inches off the mattress, the restraint straining, the leather creaking. Her eyes rolled back, showing only the whites. The heavy blankets over the window blew inward, though the glass was still intact. The entity was signaling the outside. I pressed down on the white noise machine, holding it against her sternum with all my weight. My hands burned from the friction. I didn't speak, I didn't pray. I simply drove the static into her, using the chaos to break the signal. The lights in the hallway exploded. The fire alarm triggered not a siren but a rhythmic, pulsing blast. Ivy's head snapped toward me. The whites of her eyes were gone. The blackness had returned, leaking out like ink. Her mouth opened, stretching impossibly wide, unhinging. And then the static from the machine changed. It wasn't random anymore. It was organizing. The white noise was beginning to speak my name. The static didn't just speak my name, it chewed it. The syllables were formed from the wreckage of the white noise, a digital, grinding approximation of human speech that vibrated directly against the bones of my inner ear. Us. The machine beneath my hands began to smoke. The plastic casing warped, melting under a heat that wasn't electrical. It was the friction of 2 realities grinding against each other. The pressure in the room maximized. The windows bowed inward, the glass groaning. Ivy was no longer shaking. She was rigid, suspended in that impossible levitation, her back arched like a bowstring. Then the entity jumped. It didn't leave her, it expanded. I felt it hit me like a physical blow to the sternum. A wave of freezing cold flooded my chest, seizing my lungs. My vision greased over with black static. I wasn't looking at my daughter anymore. I was looking into a hole in the world, a vast, oscillating darkness where logic went to die. The voice in the static shifted. It wasn't Sarah's anymore. It was a chorus, a though. My nose burst, hot blood sprayed over the melting machine. The pain was blinding, a white-hot spike driving through my temples. The entity was offering a trade, my mind for hers. If I let go, the pressure would stop. I looked at Ivy. Her skin was translucent, her veins black and pulsing. She was fading. The resonance was shaking her atoms apart. I didn't let go, I pressed harder. I drove the machine down into her chest, pushing with every ounce of leverage I had, forcing the chaotic noise into the rhythmic, parasitic order of the entity. The machine exploded, a flash of blue light, a deafening crack of ozone, and the speaker cone shattered. The force threw me backward. I hit the wall, my head cracking against the plaster. Then silence. Absolute ringing silence. The pressure vanished, the heavy blankets fell still. The air returned to room temperature in a single, impossible second. I lay on the floor, gasping, wiping blood from my upper lip. My ears rang with a high, thin whine. I crawled toward the bed. Ivy had collapsed onto the mattress. She was limp, a ragdoll of limbs and cotton. Her eyes were closed. I reached out my hand trembling and touched her arm. It was warm. The burning cold was gone. The rigidity was gone. Her skin felt like the skin of a 10-year-old girl. Her eyelids fluttered and opened. The blackness was gone. Her irises were there, bright, clear hazel. She blinked, focusing on me. Confusion clouded her face. She looked at the straps on her wrists, then at the blood on my face. "Daddy," she whispered. It was her voice, weak, terrified, but hers. No distortion, no delay. I tore the straps loose and pulled her into my arms. She buried her face in my shoulder, weeping softly. I held her for a long time, listening to the silence of the house. The furnace didn't kick on. The phone didn't ring. The world was normal again. The science had won. I pulled back slightly to look at her face. I needed to check her vitals. I needed to be the doctor one last time. "Just breathe for me," I said gently. I pressed my ear against her chest, right over her heart, closing my eyes to listen for the steady, reassuring thump-thump of a living pulse. I waited. There was no thump, there was no heartbeat. In the silence of her chest, amplified by the contact of my ear against her ribs, there was only a sound, faint, rhythmic. Scratching. It was the sound of a needle finding a groove. Scratching. And then the pattern. 7 beats, a pause, 7 beats. I pulled back, horrified, staring into her face. Ivy smiled. It was the same wide, white smile. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice perfect, her eyes bright and soulless. "It keeps what it hears." She raised a finger to her lips.